Pretense to passion, a love that redefined power and hearts. Carmen was just an ordinary secretary, hardworking, outspoken, and fiercely independent. But her life took an extraordinary turn when she found herself pretending to be the girlfriend of Diego Morales, a ruthless and cold-hearted CEO. At first it was merely a business arrangement, a means to an end. But as they spent more time together, the line between pretense and reality began to blur. Love slowly crept into their hearts. Would Diego have the courage to give up everything for her? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit like, share it with your friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more heartfelt stories. The clock on the wall struck exactly 8 a.m., its rhythmic chime echoing through the spacious office on the top floor of Morales Enterprises. Carmen hurriedly stacked a pile of documents on her desk, preparing for another busy day. She had been Diego Morales' personal secretary for 2 years now, and she knew better than anyone how demanding he could be. Diego Morales was infamous, not only for his striking good looks, but also for his icy demeanor, ruthless decisions, and complete disbelief in love. He ruled his empire with an iron fist, showing no mercy or emotion. Yet, despite his intimidating presence, Carmen wasn't one to back down. Unlike others who tiptoed around him, she always spoke her mind, challenging him whenever she felt it necessary. That was precisely why she was still here, the only employee brave enough to stand up to him without getting fired. But today felt different. Miss Lopez. A deep, authoritative voice echoed as Diego stepped into the office. His strikingly handsome face remained unreadable, his dark eyes studying her intently. Carmen placed his coffee on the desk, straightened her posture, and greeted him professionally. "Good morning, Mr. Morales. Sit down." He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Carmen raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unusual request, but complied. Facing her boss, she felt something was off. Diego never made small talk or called her into meetings unless it was strictly work-related. "You've been my secretary for 2 years now, correct?" he asked. "Yes," Carmen replied, "and I'm good at my job." "I know," Diego said, "but this isn't about work." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. "I have a proposal for you." Carmen frowned. "What kind of proposal?" Diego sat back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I want you to pretend to be my girlfriend for 3 months." Carmen stared at him, stunned. "You're joking, right?" Diego's expression didn't change. "I don't joke about business." "This isn't business." Carmen shot back, crossing her arms. "My family is pressuring me to get married," Diego explained. "They've already chosen someone for me, a woman I have no interest in marrying. If I don't bring someone to events and act like I'm in a relationship, they'll force me into that engagement." Carmen shook her head. "Why would I agree to this?" Diego leaned forward again, his tone firm. "Because I'll double your salary." Carmen froze. She couldn't deny that the money would help. Her younger brother was trying to go to college, and the extra income would make a huge difference. "You already know about my brother, don't you?" she asked quietly. Diego nodded. "Yes, and I know you can't afford to turn this down." Carmen sighed, feeling trapped. "Fine, I'll do it." A satisfied smile crossed Diego's face. "Good. Tomorrow night we'll attend a charity gala hosted by my family. Be ready." As Carmen left the office, she couldn't shake the strange feeling in her chest. This was just a fake arrangement, right? Nothing more. Standing before the full-length mirror in the dressing room, Carmen examined herself in the deep crimson velvet gown. The dress hugged her curves perfectly, accentuating her smooth, fair skin. Delicate, shimmering jewelry complemented her elegant updo, making her look more sophisticated than she had ever imagined. A strange feeling welled up inside her. She had never worn anything this luxurious before. Knock, knock. The sound of someone at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and opened it. Diego Morales stood before her, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. The soft glow of the chandelier reflected off his sleek dark hair, emphasizing the chiseled sharpness of his features. His grey eyes scanned her from head to toe, a flicker of approval flashing across them. "Not bad," he said with a smirk. Carmen rolled her eyes. Was that supposed to be a compliment? "You don't have to flatter me," Diego said, his tone teasing. "But if you're hoping for another raise, you might want to learn how to compliment your boss." Carmen smirked, hiding her nerves. This was just a fake arrangement after all. Nothing more. Carmen chuckled, shaking her head. "I'll think about it," she said, half joking. Diego extended his arm. "Let's go." The moment they entered the grand ballroom, all eyes turned to them. Murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. No one could believe that Diego Morales, the cold, unattainable CEO, was openly attending an event with an unknown secretary by his side. Carmen felt the scrutinizing stares but maintained her poised smile. She recalled Diego's instructions. "Just play the role of my girlfriend. Don't give anything away." Simple enough. She just had to act the part, get through the contract, collect her money and walk away. Everything seemed under control, until she noticed something that made her heart pound. As they conversed with business partners, Diego suddenly tightened his grip on her hand. His palm burned against hers, his hold almost possessive. Startled, Carmen turned to look at him, only to find that he had swiftly averted his gaze. His expression was unreadable, but his posture was tense. She followed his line of sight. There, across the room, stood a woman Carmen had never seen before. The woman had golden blonde hair elegantly tied up, wearing a white spaghetti strap evening gown that accentuated her graceful shoulders. Her emerald green eyes were sharp, and her full red lips burned like fire. But most importantly, her face was filled with shock and pain as she saw Diego tightly holding Carmen's hand. A strange feeling crept over Carmen. She had the uneasy sense that she was merely a pawn in a much bigger game. What exactly did Diego want from her? Carmen could feel the tension rising in the air. She noticed Diego's clenched jaw and the way the blonde woman was staring at him, her eyes full of hurt. Subtly, Carmen nudged Diego with her elbow and whispered, "Who is she?" Diego didn't answer right away. His gaze remained locked on the woman, a complex emotion flickering in his stormy grey eyes. Finally, he turned to Carmen and murmured, just loud enough for her to hear, "Just play your role." And then the woman stepped forward. "Marcela," Diego greeted, his voice deep and unreadable. The woman let out a soft chuckle, though her eyes betrayed her emotions. "It's been a while, Diego." "So you two are close?" Marcela blinked at Carmen, her gaze assessing. Diego didn't hesitate. "This is Carmen, my girlfriend." Carmen's stomach tightened. She knew this was all an act, but Marcela's expression made her feel like an imposter. "Really?" Marcela smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I never thought you'd be able to forget the past so easily." Carmen felt Diego's fingers tighten around hers. She turned to look at him, but found only cold determination in his expression. "It ended a long time ago, Marcela," Diego said, his voice low and firm. "You should move on with your life." Marcela studied him for a long moment before letting out a bitter smile. "Is that so? Never mind." She shook her head, finally shifting her gaze to Carmen. "And you? Congratulations." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Carmen gently pulled her hand from Diego's grip, taking a small step back. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Diego clenched his jaw, exhaling slowly as if debating whether to answer. At last he said, "She's someone from my past." Carmen raised an eyebrow. "Someone you once loved?" He didn't reply, but his silence spoke louder than words. The atmosphere between them grew heavy. Carmen felt an odd tightness in her chest, an unfamiliar and unwelcome feeling. She reminded herself that this was just an act, that she had no right to feel jealous or uneasy, and yet her heart still clenched painfully in her chest. "What are you thinking?" Diego's deep voice pulled her from her thoughts. She forced a smile, shaking her head. "Nothing." Diego studied her for a long moment, as if trying to see through her lie. Then, without warning, he wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her closer. "Then keep playing your role," he murmured, and before she could react, he lowered his head and kissed her. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd around them. Carmen froze. Diego's lips were soft, yet the kiss burned through her like wildfire. Just an act, she reminded herself. Just a show. But her heart pounded wildly, betraying her. She didn't notice the furious green eyes watching from across the room. Marcella's fists clenched at her sides. She refused to let things end this way. From that night on, Carmen noticed a shift in Diego's behavior. He no longer kept his distance. Every time they were in public, his arm would linger around her waist. His hand would hold hers tightly, and most confusing of all, the way he looked at her no longer seemed like mere pretense. But what unsettled her the most was that even when they were alone, he still hadn't changed. Diego Morales, the cold and ruthless CEO, was now treating her with an unexpected gentleness. She didn't know whether to feel flattered or terrified. One late afternoon, as Carmen was organizing documents in Diego's office, the door suddenly swung open. "Diego, we need to talk," Marcella said sharply. Carmen stood in the doorway, her expression resolute. None of the vulnerability from before remained. She immediately sensed the tension thickening in the room. Diego remained seated behind his desk, his fingers tapping lightly against the surface. "I don't think we have anything left to say," he said calmly. Marcella smirked. "Do you really expect me to believe that you love her?" Carmen stiffened as Marcella stepped forward, her voice sharp. "I know you, Diego. Diego Morales doesn't open his heart to anyone. You don't believe in love, and now all of a sudden you have a girlfriend. A secretary, no less. What exactly are you trying to prove?" Diego didn't respond. His grey eyes were like steel, cold and impenetrable. Marcella scoffed. "Or is this just an act?" Carmen held her breath as Diego slowly stood from his chair, walking toward Marcella. He neither confirmed nor denied her accusation. Instead, his voice was chillingly calm. "If I were putting on an act, do you think I'd let you figure it out so easily?" Marcella faltered, but quickly recovered. "Whatever was between us is over, Marcella," Diego said, his voice unwavering. "I don't need to prove anything to you." Carmen was taken aback when she saw Marcella lose her composure. "You're lying," Marcella snapped. She turned to Carmen, a challenging smirk playing on her lips. "If you two are really in love, then kiss in front of me." The air in the room grew unbearably heavy. Carmen's eyes widened in shock. "What?" Marcella crossed her arms, her gaze taunting. "What's wrong? Or is this just an act?" Diego's expression darkened as he looked at Carmen. Then, without warning, he gripped her waist and pulled her close. Carmen barely had time to react before his hand tilted her chin up, and in the next moment he lowered his head and kissed her. Unlike the kiss at the party, this one was slow, deeper. Her heart pounded wildly as she felt the intensity of his emotions. Marcella clenched her jaw, her hands curling into fists. When Diego finally pulled away, his gaze remained locked on Carmen. "Are you satisfied?" he asked, but not to Marcella. He was asking Carmen. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. She knew this was just to prove a point to Marcella, and yet, why did it feel so real? Marcella let out a frustrated huff before turning on her heels and storming out, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Diego still held Carmen in his arms. She couldn't look away from him. "You," her voice came out hoarse. "You didn't have to do that." Diego didn't respond right away. After a moment, he finally whispered, "I don't like being doubted." But his eyes told a different story, that this was no longer just an act. After the incident with Marcella, Carmen found her relationship with Diego more confusing than ever. She could no longer deny it. She had fallen for him. But what about Diego? Did he truly love her? Or was everything he did still part of this elaborate performance? She couldn't go on like this. She needed answers. A week later, Diego hosted a grand party to announce his company's new project. Carmen still played the role of his girlfriend in front of the public, but tonight, she couldn't keep up the charade any longer. Once she finished her duties, she pulled Diego away from the crowd, leading him to the quiet rooftop terrace. Diego raised an eyebrow at her. "Is there something you want to say?" Carmen took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Diego, this charade, it has to end." Her voice trembled slightly. "I can't keep pretending. I've fallen in love with you." Diego froze. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Finally, he asked, "But I don't know if everything I've done was ever real," she said with a sad smile. "If this is still just a game to you, then I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore." Silence stretched between them. Carmen felt her heart clench. She turned to leave, but Diego's hand wrapped tightly around her wrist, stopping her. "Wait," he said, his voice rough. She bit her lip, unwilling to turn back. "Carmen," he began, "I never thought of this as a game." Her breath hitched. Diego clenched his fists, as if battling with himself. After a long pause, he finally admitted, "I planned everything. A fake relationship, a contract, a game with an expiration date." He let out a quiet laugh, but his eyes were filled with conflict. "But there was one thing I didn't plan for." He held her gaze. "I didn't plan to fall in love with you." Carmen's heart skipped a beat. "You think you're the only one who's confused?" Diego gave a rare, almost self-deprecating smile. "I tried to lie to myself that I was only doing what was necessary to protect my company. But the truth is, I've been in love with you for a long time." Carmen was stunned. Diego stepped closer, gently cupping her cheek. "I love you, Carmen," he murmured, his voice deep and sincere. "And I don't want this to be just an act anymore." She looked into his eyes, her heart overflowing with emotion. She didn't know who moved first, but in the next moment, their lips met. This kiss wasn't to prove anything to anyone. It was simply because they truly loved each other. 1 year later, Carmen walked down the garden aisle of the Morales estate. Her white wedding gown flowed gracefully in the gentle breeze, and her heart pounded faster as she saw Diego waiting at the end of the aisle, looking striking in his black tuxedo. As she reached him, he took her hand and held it tightly. "I told you," Diego whispered. "I was never going to let you go." Carmen beamed. "And I never wanted to leave." As the officiant read the vows, Diego leaned in and whispered softly in her ear, "I love you." And this time there was no contract, no pretense, only real love. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more meaningful stories, because every great love deserves to be told and retold.